Hi there, everyone. Welcome to our September Women Veterans Empowerment Dialogue. Thanks so much to everyone who's joined us today. Today, we're going to be exploring the topic of getting involved in creating space for women in veteran organizations. And we have two panelists that are going to be with us today, Susan Thaxton, who's with us now, and we're also going to be joined by Melissa Margain. So to kick off the discussion, let's do some brief introductions, a brief overview of your veteran community involvement. So I'll kind of start off to set the stage. So I'm Morgan Vardy. I'm the program coordinator here at Warrior Scholar Project. So I joined WSP in May, and I was anxious to get involved with these women veteran empowerment dialogues. So a little about myself. I served in the Marine Corps from 2009 until 2014 as a military police officer. And after leaving the Marine Corps, I moved to State College from Japan, where I was stationed, to finish my bachelor's degree at Penn State. There I joined SWAG, which stands for the Service Women's Advocacy Group. And I connected with a handful of other women veterans. My involvement with SWAG led me to complete a work-study position at our student veteran office on campus. I was a student veteran sponsor. There I assisted incoming students with settling into campus life, facilitating academic and social connections, and providing information for local veteran resources. After that, I became a lawyer. I clerked for a judge, but I felt a huge void in not only my personal life, but my professional life. And that void was a connection to the military and veteran community. So I'm extremely honored to be a part of Warrior Scholar Project. I'm honored to be here facilitating this panel, and my void is now filled. So I'm very grateful to be back with the community that I consider family. Well, I see Melissa's joined, but Susan, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Thank you for having me. So I'm Susan Thaxton. I'm the Chief Programs Officer for the Mission Continues. For those who are not familiar, the Mission Continues is a national nonprofit that gets veterans to continue their service by volunteering in under-resourced communities. In terms of my kind of my own veteran experience and my connection to all things veteran. I was in the Navy and I actually got out in 1999, and it was definitely a time where there was no thank you for your service. It was just a job, and nobody was really concerned about what people did in the military. I started business school in August of 2001. And 3 weeks in, 9/11 happened. And even in business school, the military members, the veterans were just kind of an anomaly. And I remember when they had a veteran event for us, about 10% of the program were veterans. And I remember going in and it being a room full of men, and there were two other women there. And I remember the three women you could just see we were all making a point not to be near each other, that it was like, we're not together. Like in this environment, we don't align. Like we can be just like anybody else here. We're not going to be with each other. And that was really my only veteran experience until 2019. I am kind of the stereotypical women veteran who doesn't consider herself to be a veteran, didn't label herself as a veteran, married to a veteran, bought a house, used his VA loan, all of that. In 2019, I was connected to somebody I had done volunteer work with long ago, and that's Mary Beth Brueggemann, who's the president of the Mission Continues, and she posted about an opportunity to attend a Women Veterans Leadership Summit, and it was the only time I'd ever thought of doing anything as a veteran, because it was with women veterans, and it felt far less intimidating, and I felt like it's a place I could belong and feel okay. And I did a weekend summit with that program, which I just loved. And part of it was doing a community service project. And it led me to where I am now, to actually work in the veteran environment. And it's been great. And it's just been wonderful for me to kind of connect back into that part of me and that experience that I had, and to realize how important it's been in my own development. And just what a wonderful group of people it is to stay connected to, veterans generally, and also women veterans in particular, which we have a women veterans program, which allows us to really foster those connections, and for me to take advantage of it as well.
Great. Thanks so much, Susan. Melissa, are you available?
Yes.
Hi, thank you.
So my name is Melissa Margain. I am the Seattle Program Director for Minority Veterans of America. We are a nonpartisan 501c3 and really work to create just change and equity amongst the veteran community. We do serve all veterans, regardless of discharge status, time in service, service error. And so I like to make mention to that because a lot of times people will hear minority vets and assume it's just for one demographic of veterans. And while, again, we do serve all vets, we do focus around advocacy, equity, inclusion for our underrepresented and underserved population. So our women vets, LGBTQ, religious and non-religious minorities, BIPOC population. And so that's kind of where the name comes from. So I always like to clear that up so that people feel as though, they have a home as well. They can come in and join our organization. I'm an Army combat veteran. I was medically separated in 2013 from an injury and have always worked around the veteran space. And so I was a former employee of the Department of Veteran Affairs. I've held positions in veteran service organizations. And previous to my work with MVA, I worked with the formerly incarcerated population. So in criminal justice, which included that small demographic of veterans that run through Veterans Court. And so just a lot of wraparound service connection and community. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, great. Thank you both, Susan and Melissa, for your introductions. So our discussion this afternoon, well, morning for the people on the West Coast, will consist of several questions that I have for both of you. And then we're going to open the floor to a question and answer session from anyone in the audience. And so just for the people watching, please feel free to type your questions into the chat or use the raise hand feature and we'll get to your question. So my first question, and I know you both touched on this a little bit, but this is more about your personal experience. So after you left active duty, did you join organizations, Susan? I know you talked about this, but did you join right away? Was there a gap, a break from the military? Did you feel like you needed a break from the military veteran community? I know for a fact I did. It took me a whole year to even want to get involved at all. Much like you, Susan, I kind of wanted to shed that identity. And so there was this, I don't know, growth period, but eventually, I came back to the idea of wanting to be involved. So if you did have a break or, weren't involved, what was the turning point of you wanting to seek out groups and get involved?
Sure, I'll take that. I didn't know where to start. For me, so I left the service in 2013 and I took a short break. It was extremely overwhelming. My transition was really heavy and hard, more so mentally than anything else. And so I had to find my footing, right? To determine how do I move forward, even in asking for support or connecting to services. My first connection though was with the American Legion. And, very close to home, felt like this is super accessible. They would get it. Not everybody in the post was ready for some change. So there's always that you kind of deal with, me being like a woman vet and being younger. A large population of that particular post was Vietnam era veterans. And so it was just difficult to navigate, nothing necessarily personal that kept me away, but just feeling like I belonged there. And so, participated a little bit and then kind of backed away. I didn't necessarily feel like I was home or that was the place for me at that time. So I decided to take some time away before I revisited another one some years later. So.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so it took me a long time to get back to it. And it wasn't necessarily that it was an aversion or anything like that. When I left the Navy, I was ready to step away from it and to step out of that environment. I was in that, when the ship that I left, I was the first woman to report to that ship. And we were I was one of two for that tour. And so I did well. I'm one of those people, the military is kind of a good environment for me. I can follow rules, show up when I need to, those sort of things that, the expectations are pretty clear. And so while I did well, I think just like anybody who's in an environment like that, where you're one of virtually none, you never really feel like it's fully where you belong. You'll never really be fully that part of that organization. And that's the way I was. I was always going to be an exception. I had great friends. I always had people to go out in Liberty with and those sort of things, but it was never really, I was always like an exception. And so when I left the Navy, I didn't really feel the need to stay tied to the military anymore because it was never really where I fully belonged anyway. And so the other piece of it too is I think we live in Annapolis, Maryland, which is where the Naval Academy is. So there's this kind of loose attachment. My husband was teaching there. And so I was kind of on the periphery of the military, not real military. It's the Naval Academy. It's kind of a special little place for the military, but always on that periphery anyway. And kind of, again, kind of feeling I was part of it, but not part of it because I was connected to it, but indirectly. And so it really wasn't until, like I said, I saw this opportunity to connect with, a women veterans organization to say like, I could give that a try and to go be a part of that. And I think I also diminished my own experience because it was pre 9/11. And so it always felt like I was, for some reason, my service was less than, and realizing that, having that opportunity to finally get involved with a veterans organization, and to really kind of learn to own that and to be proud of that and to understand, I can claim that I did my part. I served when my country needed me to serve and how I needed my country needed me to serve. And I should be really proud of that and own that.
Yeah, thank you. It sounds like finding the right group, finding the right veterans organization is a bit of an evolution, especially for women veterans, because, Melissa, like you said, the American Legion, that's something that everybody knows, but it just wasn't the right fit. So maybe could you go into a little bit more detail about how you knew when you found the right organization for you? Like what organization checked all the boxes where you finally felt, this is it. This is somewhere I can be myself. I can completely talk about my service and be proud of my service. So if you would both mind sharing a little bit about that.
Sure. So for me, it's a loaded question, only because I see some people agree. So I eventually transitioned over to my local VFW post. And again, with the same hesitancy, but I was just like, you won't know unless you go for it and you're genuine and you're open about it. My strongest connection to that post was the commander. And not that I didn't receive any respect or welcoming from the post members, but it was my post commander that absolutely changed my view on all of just the veteran service organizations. We had open dialogue. It was honest. It was raw. It was what I needed. I felt heard and included, and not that I needed something special, right? Or needed to feel like I required more attention than other post members, but I didn't look like other post members, and sometimes we just have to call that what it is. I come from a very conservative county in California. I'm originally from the Bay Area. And it was just a hard transition to come back to, like I said, to feel heard, like Susan mentioned, to feel like my service mattered, right? That I was bringing something to the table that was as equally important and relevant to the other post members. But I will always give all praise to that post commander. He was amazing, and even got me to run for office. And so I eventually became the junior vice commander for that post, first woman ever to hold office in that post since 1986. And it was just, that for me was home until I transitioned here to Washington. So.
Wow, that's amazing. Congratulations. Thank you.
Yeah, so mine obviously is gonna be a little plug for the Mission Continues as well, because that was my experience in connecting with veterans. So like I said, I participated in a weekend summit, a Women Veterans Leadership Summit. We've since turned that into, it's a 5-month cohort program now. And the reason it came about was because there were so many women veterans who, we're participating with the Mission Continues. Our volunteers actually skew much higher than the veteran population in terms of women, with about 45% of our volunteers and our volunteer leaders are women. So it skews much higher than the veteran population. And so there was work done to kind of understand why women veterans were coming to us and what they were looking for to get out of that experience. And so it's a leadership program very much targeted to speak to women veterans, right? And so it's not just to upskill, but also to recognize the skills they had in the military sometimes don't translate well into the civilian world. True for men also, but in a different way. And so having that opportunity to be able to kind of talk openly about that. And the other piece of it was we did a service project. And so we were in a school and we're using power tools and we're painting and we're doing community gardens. And it just was just this great experience to kind of be back and gritty and dirty and working hard together and having just a group of women do this together was really fantastic. And just the service experience alone is what just really brought me into really loving the veteran community and taking back kind of all those best parts of what service was to me, where it's just kind of, everybody's just willing to do something and get a job done, regardless of what their title is or their role or anything else. Let's just get this done and have a good time doing it. And it just really connected me back to all the good stuff that I enjoyed about my military experience. And it just opened me up too to how many other veteran organizations are out there doing very good, very similar kind of work to give veterans those opportunities to connect. And it's just, I just think it's such a great thing to be able to do in a way that you just can't find in other places. You can't have those kind of connections in that same way through volunteerism like you can when you reconnect with your veteran community.
I really like the way you put that, brought back the best parts of service. That's a really great way of saying that. I know that we have probably quite a few of the people watching are, newly transitioned or maybe in higher education or seeking higher education. So like a small piece of advice or some sort of little tidbit that you would give people who are looking to find an organization, because it can really be a struggle, especially if you're on the fence about, do I want to be involved? Do I not want to be involved? That's like a personal timeline. But if there's one piece of advice for people struggling to find that right fit organization.
I would say do research. Find what organizations are local to you, even if they are your larger service veteran service organizations like your American Legion, VFW. Attend a few meetings. You don't have to necessarily join right away, which is great. Just get an opportunity to meet the members, meet the post commanders, find out what they're doing in their community. But yeah, find your tribe, most definitely. I know there are tons and tons of groups on Facebook and other social media platforms as well. Start small, but just don't be afraid. You just never know what's out there for you or what and who you can connect to. So yeah, I encourage you to attend a couple of meetings. I'm not sure if they're holding any virtual meetings right now because of COVID, but definitely do your research. The Mission Continues is great. We work with them out here in Seattle, so I'll plug them as well. They're doing amazing work. But yeah, just step out on faith and take that chance.
Yeah, and I think Melissa's absolutely right. And I think there's another piece of it too, is doing a little kind of doing your internal homework too, of what are you looking for? What are you hoping to get out of it? And to see if those opportunities exist in those different organizations. And I agree, it's like, go to a couple, right? You can't, if one time may not be the best time, maybe unless it's absolutely terrible, but as long as you're like, maybe I'll try a second time or a third time to see if that works out. I'd say get out of your own head, get out of all the ways you talk yourself down from things, and instead don't do what I did and diminish who you are and what you've done, but instead own it and really say, know that you belong. If it's a veterans organization, you belong there. You should be there. And hopefully you feel that way when you get there. If you don't feel that way after a few times, then maybe it's time to look for something else. But definitely, understand what is you want to get out of that, and then do some research to find out some opportunities where that can line up.
And then just one more tidbit, if I might. If you do find that your needs are not available, right, or they don't exist in your area, don't be afraid to bring that, right? Bring that to the table. Identify what your need is and what other women veterans may be in need of, and bring that to the base or to the post, or to the service organization. They're always looking for new ideas, creativity. There's always a new wave of veterans coming in, and they aren't always necessarily connected to those needs. So that's also something to kind of get you out there. It's okay to bring new ideas in where something doesn't currently exist.
And And then I'm going to add on one more thing too. The other, and also keep in mind, one of the greatest resources you have is to go to a veterans organization and talk to some people, and you will learn there are so many opportunities out there. And the best way to learn about those opportunities is to go talk to people, because there are so many veterans who are so plugged in to the veteran communities, your local veteran communities, and they will know of opportunities and organizations that you had no idea ever existed. So that's another really great way to try to, another reason for getting involved is because that's the way you learn more, is to actually go get involved and find out what's out there.
Yeah, all of that is great advice. And I will say that I found most of that applicable in my own life as well. So hopefully that helps somebody out there looking for, the next step in their involvement. So my next question is changing course a little bit, but how did or does your involvement with women veterans organizations or organizations geared more towards specific veterans differ from like the more general type organizations that kind of serve everyone, if that makes sense?
Can you repeat it again just for me so I understand how to answer it?
Yeah, sure. So I guess what I'm just asking is, throughout your involvement with different veterans groups, what is the difference between, kind of just general veterans groups and then veterans groups that are geared more towards specific veterans, like women, for instance?
Sure. Well, I can only speak from my experience as a woman vet. And I say that because I don't want to take away what needs, just kind of the general population of veterans may need. As a woman veteran who transitioned with young children, as a single mother, that was hard. Mental health was hard. It was kind of getting rid of that stigma of reaching out for help, figuring out what it is really I needed. I unfortunately left my service with some trauma that I also had to navigate, and which is even more hard, right? Because now I have to open up and talk about it and kind of relive it as I'm going through it. So there are gender specific areas that I think women vets need support in. So again, right, trauma, anything regarding like parenting, physical, sexual health, things like that. What I found interesting with my service was, and I like to tell people that I meet with here locally, is I know who I was before I joined the military, right? I remember young, naive, ready to go, energetic Melissa out of high school. I know who I've had to become since my service, right? Through my transition and my disabilities and all of these things I've had to navigate, but I don't always know who I am in the present time, if that makes sense. And that's something I never considered with my service. I was injured in Iraq, and I remember standing in line, getting ready to deploy, thinking I'm either going to come back or I'm not. Like those were the two things in my head, that fear, but not once did I ever consider coming back injured. I don't know why. That just never crossed my mind that I would have to come back and figure out how to do things again, figure out how to trust and not be on edge. And so I think there are a lot of things that should be considered when you're dealing with and trying to support women vets, but that was just my personal experience. Mental health was so big for me, and it took such a long time to connect to those services, and I'm glad I did. I think that had I done it sooner, I probably would have had a different transition, but please go and seek help if that's something that, you are kind of going back and forth with in your head, whatever it is. Reach out to someone. Like Susan said, veterans in your community are oftentimes very well connected and can get you somewhere. So that was my 2 cents. I hope I didn't ramble, but that's something very important, I think.
Yeah, thank you. It's great points, because a lot of times I think bigger groups might, like you were saying, might not cater exactly to that. And while everyone's experience is different regardless, there's something about women's veterans groups that just, it takes it to another level. I know at Warrior Scholar Project, we're hosting this last summer, we had a couple all women cohorts, and I had the pleasure of being able to be involved with one of them and kind of sitting through it, participating. And it was just so different. The teamwork, everything was just not different in a bad way, but different in such a great way. The conversations that happened were different. The relationship building was different. It was so strong. And, I think they're all still talking and connected. And it's just such a wonderful, important thing. I think all groups should kind of consider and do something for. Susan, do you?
Yeah, so I've mentioned we have our women's program, which is obviously it's focused on women veterans and leadership program for them, and a chance to upskill their leadership skills, adapt their leadership skills. So focusing on things like communications, we have a networking session, which is where I think a lot of women veterans really struggle, is to think about, like, who do I know that can actually help me professionally? And and really teaching them, like, you actually do know people, and here they are. And here's how you go about approaching it. And here's how you can try to find a mentor. And here's how you can try to find a sponsor, because those are things that, again, men don't get those either, aren't taught those necessarily in the military either. They definitely come more organically in the military than they do for women. And teaching women to give them, like, you can do this, and here's exactly how you do it, I think is really empowering. And we know that. I mean, we hear back from our women who do that, that it is helpful. And like you were saying, Morgan, and the conversations are different, right? When you bring a group of women together, it is different. Their experiences are different. What they're willing to share about those experiences are very different. What they value in each other's experiences are very different. And so it brings women to a place where they can kind of understand themselves in a different way, and frankly have a lot more confidence in themselves because of that positive feedback that they're getting. The other thing we find with the Mission Continues, like I was saying, is our volunteers definitely are much, we have a lot more women represented as a whole than what the veteran population is. And so to me, it really speaks to, the environment that we have, the environment our volunteers are create. And what we offer too is we have places for our women to go connect with other veterans, both men and women, to go out into their communities and serve together. So they can be in our women's leadership program, but then they have service platoons in their communities that they can go to, so they can continue in the veteran community. And not only that, they can step up and lead within those, in this really great environment where they can demonstrate these leadership skills that they are building through that experience in the cohort. So we see a difference. We know that. I love seeing our women veterans leading some really great projects. Part of when we're not virtual, and we have our in-person cohorts, we do service projects, and I just love seeing women stepping up and taking the lead on power tools and showing each other how to do it, because it's not something that you see often. And it's not really about the power tool, but it's about that empowerment that comes through learning something that you typically don't equate with what a woman is doing, or what women step up and do on their own. So it's definitely, I love seeing it. I think it's just a great environment. And we know that our women veterans are benefiting from that.
You made a really good point, Susan, and I just wanted to follow up with that if I can. When you talk about your service pre 9/11 and how, you kind of went back and forth with, does my service, even equate? And I think that that's something that we should also mention, in that it is just simply getting women veterans to identify. There are so many women vets who have done so many wonderful things and compare their service typically to their male counterpart. Or again, did I deploy? Did I not deploy? Like, am I really considered a veteran? And that was one of the reasons that MVA was started. One of our co-founders kind of went through a similar thing where she kind of questioned, do I, deserve this? Should I get this praise? Should I even identify as a veteran? And so a lot of the work that MVA is doing here in King County in Washington is trying to find that population. There are over 2 million women veterans in the United States. And it's such a hard demographic to really connect with, at least here on the West Coast and in this region. And so changing that narrative, letting them know your service matters, whether it was 4 years or 1 year, you raised your hand, you volunteered for your service. Doesn't matter what your MOS was or whether you saw combat, you are a veteran. Like Susan mentioned earlier, you deserve to be in those service organizations. Connect to those services, get your benefits, go to the VA. You deserve to be there. So I just wanted to kind of end things with that.
Actually, I'm just gonna, if I can jump on one more thing to be sure. And Melissa had also mentioned kind of her own experience in transition and with trauma, and we definitely see that. I mean, it's definitely prevalent in the Women Veterans Program, and that's something that we know our audience. And this is the other thing with getting involved in veterans organizations, that we certainly we aren't mental health care providers. But what we do know is we have services and resources that we can connect to. We're part of the Veteran Wellness Alliance out of the Bush Institute, and where people can go right in through a program and get mental health right through there. So again, we don't provide it. We definitely see people, it can come up from time to time, and we are able to direct our women or just any veterans that work with us as to how they can get resources. But I think, again, that's a really important part of the about veterans organizations, again, is where those resources exist that maybe you wouldn't be able to find on your own, and having those available.
Well, thank you both. My last question was going to be, why do you think it's important to have a space that involves women veterans? But I think your answers tied that up, really summarized that beautifully. So I think we can probably move past that question, and maybe we can, work in aspects of that into our Q&A. So I think it's a good time maybe to move to questions from our viewers watching. So it looks like we have a couple in the chat here. So one of the questions is, like Susan mentioned, being the exception or the minority can be intimidating. Do you have advice for someone who may be nervous to speak up and advocate for minority members, especially if you don't have many people on your side to back you up?
Was that to anybody specifically?
Oh, yeah, sorry, that's just open. That was just a question from one of our viewers, so feel free either.
I can let Susan follow up, since it was an original comment. I didn't want to take over that.
Yeah, so I think it's this is more from personal experience than anything else. I also worked in an auto plant for a while, and I was very much like a lot younger, a lot smaller and one of very few women in there too. So it's kind of been a theme in many ways for me. But I think when you are, at least in my experience, being a woman and a white woman, where you are in those situations, I have always gone in quietly and kind of just got a lay of the land to kind of understand what's the environment here, who are the people that I'm probably going to have some opportunities to align myself with, to maybe get some advice or from tips for them, or at least know like they have some sort of influence here that I can be a part of that, and understand where I can speak up and where I can start to demonstrate that I belong there, that I have value in being there, that I have a thought that matters, that can actually move things forward. And that's me. That's the way that I deal with it. I remember one of our women's sessions, we had a panel, and there was a woman who, if you had asked her this question, it was a very similar one. And she was the complete opposite end of the spectrum. And she was like, you will never tell me I can't be in a room. But it worked for her because that was her. She was like 6 feet tall, and she was like very striking and interesting to see and everything else. And so that was her experience. And that's what she found worked for her. So like I said, for me, I've kind of had that approach of like, I go in and kind of see what's happening before I'm going to speak up and assert myself. But some people, that's not the way that they're going to go about it.
I agree with Susan. I would go in and just kind of figure out the lay of the land, kind of watch what's happening. I ask questions. I ask tons of questions. I show up, I volunteer, so that my presence becomes, I guess, more normal, if that's a good word to use, right? Or I become a more familiar face, right? So I'm constantly here and showing. And that was actually something that happened with the VFW post. I was always the spouse, right? Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I was always like, oh, do you need to join the auxiliary? Do you need to be here? And it was just like, no, I'm the veteran, like this is my service, I'm here for me. And then, yeah, you just have to get to that place where you pose those questions, whether it's to the commander or to other service members, like what else is happening in this community? I would ask straightforward questions like, why aren't there other vets that look like me, right? Like we're here, right? I know we live here in this local area. Like why isn't the demographic of your post members, why doesn't it look different? Like, why is it all just this, service error? What's happening? Like, what does your outreach look like? So I would just kind of start with those generalized questions to see what is that post doing, or what is that organization doing in order to attract or draw in new membership. So never be afraid to advocate for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And I know that I went through a period of that myself where I kept going to these veteran groups and I was just sitting there like, I don't like this. Like, this could be different, or this doesn't have anything to do with me. And I guess for maybe people who, because I wasn't super outgoing at first, like it took me a long time of sitting there thinking, I could do this differently, or I could do this better. And, that's okay. Like sometimes that type of, waiting longer or waiting till you feel like you're ready to do it. It might make it better. I know for me, I'm very strategic and planned. So, sitting there for 2 months thinking like this could be better helped me lay out a great plan to do that. So thank you. That's a great point. Let's see, let's go to the next question. So this question is for everyone. So can you all touch on how experience with being diverted to an auxiliary of a larger organizations? Also, is anyone having a larger conversation at the leadership level of any of these larger organizations on outreaching to more women?
Okay. So yes, and I think I mentioned that in my last comment. So just being misidentified, right, which can be extremely frustrating, especially like you said, when you're being diverted to like the auxiliary or like support, right, or partners. And that starts with just military culture, I think. I'm not sure what everybody else's experiences have been, but even like with the VA checking in, like I've been called Mr. Margain, right? And I've been, are you here for your husband or your father, or just kind of, smaller things like that. I know at the larger level, at least with the Department of Veteran Affairs, we've partnered with them specifically for women veteran outreach. So working with those offices, creating different marketing ideas and groups and programs that cater specifically to women veterans. Putting women veterans in leadership or forward-facing positions is also extremely helpful because it creates a sense of like her voice matters, right? Or like, okay, there are new ideas being brought to the table. That's one way I think could be also really helpful, is putting women vets in positions to connect to other women veterans. Platforms such as this, work that the Mission Continues is doing, just reconfirming that your service matters. It is important, and that we want to hear your voice. We want to hear your lived experiences. We want to hear suggestions. So yeah, just creating a platform and a space where there are more women veterans that are out there advocating and pushing for what is needed.
And I just to add to that too, I think it's organizations that are serving women veterans also to partner together. So we one of the things that we do with our program is we do a resource fair, and we try to get other organizations that are specifically have at least aspects of their programming that are specific to women veterans. So it's because we know there's such a demand for it. We've seen just by our own application numbers, there's such a demand for women veterans wanting those opportunities to connect. So we do feel a responsibility to not just have it end there, but have them understand like there are some other places they can be looking as well. I think one of the big things too, in terms of what leadership should be looking at, is really understanding why they want to have women veterans and being very clear to themselves about, is it because it looks good? Is it because there's a grant that we should get, and so we should just be doing this? Or is it really because it's an asset to the organization to be working with women veterans, that they can help you think differently? They can probably improve your programming. They have a perspective that isn't really, as predominant in the veteran voice that's out there, and really making sure that anything that they're trying to do around women veterans, it's really because it's good for the organization to be trying to get involved with women veterans, from a really deep and genuine point, not because it fulfills some sort of check in the box that they need.
Yeah,
Such an excellent point.
yeah, and so we have one last question here that we'll do, and I think it ties in perfectly. So the question says, Melissa mentioned the difficulty in finding women veterans within the larger community. So what suggestions or strategies do either of you have for organizations who want to become more visible to women veterans?
So here in Washington, what MVA has been able to determine, and specifically in King County, that's one of my larger coverage areas, so I want to speak to that specifically, is we find that a lot of our women veterans who are students are also single parents who have, are experiencing food insecurity, transportation insecurity, childcare insecurity. So we work to kind of connect women veterans to those resources. So that's something we're doing. We're connecting to all of our local colleges and institutions that have veteran service organizations or veteran clubs on campus. We launched a women veterans food pantry earlier this year because we know, especially with COVID, there were so many challenges that we're just facing, just communities as a whole, but we were finding with the women veteran population, they were really, really struggling. And so we launched a pantry where they're able to shop in our pantry twice a year for free, just getting items that they need for their families. So that includes hygiene items, personal care items, baby items. And the reason why we chose twice a year is because they will then be enrolled into a program that will help them aim towards like self-sufficiency. So if they want to get back into the workforce or higher education, there's a case management component that comes with that. And again, they're able to participate in other services throughout the year and additionally be connected to other organizations. So there's this huge wraparound effort to just really get them to just come out and support. And we've been finding that word of mouth is extremely important, right? I've had this experience with this organization. I felt seen, I felt heard, I felt welcomed. Come and see what's happening. That's also a really big kind of piece when it comes to women vets, at least that's what we find, is word of mouth, being referred one-on-one. What is your experience? And will I kind of have a similar one?
Yes, we have definitely seen that same thing, that word of mouth matters. And in terms of just getting visibility for women veterans to be aware, I think there's a couple of things, like I said before, I think partnership is really an important thing, finding out who is working with women veterans and making that, being able to tap into those communities. Again, thinking about, as Melissa was talking about, knowing the audience, right? And being able to provide programming and services that are applicable to women veterans. And I'm blanking. I was just going to say one more thing, and I lost it. But I just think there's tremendous opportunity that's out there. Again, like I said, there is demand, and so if your program is good and you're meeting the I hate to use the word needs, some of its desires of women veterans, the demand is there, because there needs to be more of it for sure.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think the idea of what you were saying, Melissa, the idea of wraparound services is really important because, a lot of organizations are trying to help women veterans, but everybody's needs are different. Susan, like you were saying, so having this, plethora, or having kind of a spectrum of different things that someone can say, this is what I'm looking to get from it. I think having all those things readily available is really, really important. So thank you both. So our time is going to come to a close here, but I'll just kindly ask each of you to please just give a small piece of advice or a closing remark, or maybe a shout out to a military or veteran organization that's special to you.
Well, I'll do a shameless plug for Minority Vets first. No, right now. But seriously, like I stated earlier, my advice is just do some research, find what organizations and what programs are local in your community. I saw some mention in the chat, tons of Facebook groups out there just for women veterans. as a whole, women veterans in particular regions or states. I know that there are about 30 different military sororities, if that's your thing, there's so many things that are available. Again, I'm super proud of the work that NVA does every day. We do work on Capitol Hill and have had input on over 50 bills that directly affect veterans, women vets, all vets. The food pantry, connecting to community colleges and institutions. You got to get on the ground, right? It has to be boots on the ground work. You got to get dirty. It's not always going to be fun, but it is necessary. It is absolutely necessary. If you're unsure how to connect or just need a little bit more support, you feel free to reach out to myself. I'll drop my email in the chat. I'm here to answer any questions to help guide you, whether I am in your region or not, but please just connect to a woman vet for support, if nothing else.
Yes, and so I'll do a shameless plug as well. So I mentioned our women's program a number of times, but also our platoons, our service platoons that are in 42 cities across the country right now. It's a great place to tap into both women veterans, but veterans generally, and also just finding your own, through that, being able to find kind of your own empowerment, to be able to be out impacting communities in a positive way, and how much you can benefit from that and in connecting with other people. In terms of advice, I would say, I think sometimes we can get like women veterans can be like, oh, it's been so hard to be a women veteran, but remember how strong you are as a woman veteran and how much you have learned and how much you have experienced that has made you who you are. And don't be afraid to own that. Don't be afraid to tap into that. And I hope that while there may have been some bad days and some difficult experiences, I hope ultimately, what you find is that it put maybe the best part of you in some ways came out of that experience as well, and how to really lean into that.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. I hope, all of our viewers and anyone who's going to watch this later gets something out of it. I know I did. So really, really appreciate you sharing your experiences and joining us here today. So special thank you. I also want to thank everyone who watched today. Our discussion has been recorded, so you can watch this whenever, you can rewatch, you can share it. We'll put it out on our social media and our website, so please feel free to check that out. We hope that you'll join us for our next Women Veteran Empowerment Dialogue, which will be October 18th. That's a Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And before we log off completely, I'm going to pass it over to Cassie, and she's going to talk about some of our fall programs we have going on. Cassie?
Thanks, Morgan. Thanks so much, Susan and Melissa, for joining us and sharing all of your wonderful advice and insight. And that question about becoming more visible to just women veterans overall, that came from me, because I'm really trying to find out how we can tap into these communities of women and offer our resources to them. And I think that both of you had really great advice on that. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about our fall programs that Morgan mentioned. We've got 4 coming up in the fall. I'm going to put a link in the chat to where you can find this information. There's also an apply button. So if anybody out there is watching who is an enlisted veteran and is interested in pursuing higher education, I highly recommend that you check this out. I'm also going to put my email in the chat if anybody wants to reach out to me with questions, if you want to connect and talk a little bit more about what the program is and what we offer, I would be happy to do that. So please check that out. Share that resource with any woman veteran that you know, or any veteran at all, but more specifically women veterans, because we are trying to tap into that community and really serve as many women veterans as we can. So thanks, Morgan.
Thanks, Cassie. Appreciate it. Well, that's our September panel. So thank you again for everyone who joined today. Again, thank you, Melissa and Susan. I completely echo Cassie's sentiment. Your advice and sharing your experiences is invaluable. So we greatly, greatly appreciate it. We hopefully look forward to doing more things together in the future.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Susan.